Okay, welcome everyone to the Clutter or Compliance Best Practices for Micromobility Parking Design webinar. I'm delighted to welcome you. My name is Anne Brown. I'm the Research Director for the Urbanism Next Center and a professor at the University of Oregon. I'm delighted to have you all with us today from across several continents and many, many time zones. I'm going to kick us off with a few framing slides before I introduce you to our terrific panel today. And so a few housekeeping notes to get us started as people continue to join the webinar. First, I want to highlight a number of additional webinars that the Urbanism Next Center will be hosting over the coming months. You can find out more about those, register for those upcoming webinars using this QR code or online at our website where you also registered for this webinar. So please join us. We hope to see you at future events later this year. For today, of course, our highlight is Clutter or Compliance, Best Practices for Micromobility Parking Design. And the inspiration for this gathering and sharing of knowledge really came from many years of both practical efforts and city-led efforts to think about scooter parking, bike share parking, but also several years of research. So to catch you all up, and many of you know this already, but think about where are we really with what we know about micromobility parking so far. There's several key questions that I'm just going to briefly highlight for you all to get us all set up for today's webinar, which are what are the public perceptions of shared micromobility parking? What do we know about this already? And what we know is that public perceptions are poor. So e-scooters specifically are seen worse than cars or bikes when you ask people about what percentage of vehicles do you think are misparked. So we have a long way to go in terms of that public perception. And when you think about this question of, well, does what the public thinks actually match reality? It's not so much. So people generally think that cars are parked better than they are in reality, and e-scooters are parked worse. So there's this big gap between what we're seeing in practice, what the public thinks, and a lot of opportunities for city action. There's also been research that has looked at can perceptions change over time. And that research finds that yes, generally people view micromobility more favorably once they see micromobility on the streets, and that's among riders and non-riders. So when people see these modes on streets, that does tend to change opinion and change them favorably. We're talking about parking today. One question we might all have is why people mispark. Largely, research from across the globe have found that people don't know the rules. They're in a hurry, there's no spots, they can't find that dedicated parking rule. And then what interventions can change parking behaviors? Generally, there's research showing that this dense networks of dedicated parking can shape and shift where people park, and that design can change a little bit of where people park, moving people really at the margin. So the most important piece is the density of that parking network, followed by some marginal shifts about design. And Urbanism Next, again, shameless plug for some of our past work. These are co-authored with one of our webinar panelists, Nick Klein, as well as Calvin Thingpen and at Lyme, and Sian Meng, previously at the University of Oregon. We have two reports out. The QR codes here will link you to those. The one on the left here, shared scooter parking, the role of parking density and land use, is really focused on how much parking do you need to achieve compliance. So in other words, scooters parking in dedicated areas. And then the one on the right is fresh off the presses, and we'll be talking about it more today. And that's dedicated parking for micromobility. So really think of these practical nuts and bolts for implementation, really thinking from the city side about how do you make these happen in practice if they are so important to successful parking strategies. So all these questions and background lead us to this question that's guiding our webinar for today, which is what are the best practices for how to design, scale, and budget for micromobility parking. And the goal of this really is a practice-oriented webinar hearing from those who have studied these issues and have implemented them on them. So I'm very delighted to welcome our three-person panel and guest speakers. So I'll introduce them one by one, and then I will turn it over to Nick to kick us off. Each presenter will have about 10 minutes to present and share their own experiences, and then we'll open it up to an audience Q&A. So this webinar is being recorded. Should you want to go back to any of the presentations or knowledge that the panelists will share. And if you do have questions at any point, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll be having a moderated Q&A session at the end. You can also like or upvote different questions if you have a similar question to someone else, so you can raise that to the prominence of that question. Okay, so our wonderful panel, I'm going to start with Nick Klein. Nick is an associate professor at Cornell University, and Nick studies factors around how people change the way they travel and how those factors change over the course of their life. And over the past 6 years, Nick has researched various angles of mobility behavior and parking. Sandra Talebian is a project leader with Jelbi, and she works for BVG, Berlin's public transport provider. She has a background in geoecology and sustainable mobility and has worked for a variety of different mobility players. Since 2019, she's organized partnerships with more than 20 sharing providers in Berlin for Jelbi, and as of 2023, she has took over managing the 300 bus hubs, parking hubs within Berlin. And then last but not least, Nathan Pope is a transportation planner with Denver's Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, where he manages shared bikes and scooter programs, including creating and iterating their approach to shared micromobility parking. So again, welcome to this wonderful panel. I'm excited to learn from them and with you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to get our presentation started.
Thanks, Anne. Let me just share my screen. Okay, great. So thanks again, everyone, for being here, and thanks for this opportunity to talk about some of the work that Anne and Calvin and other people have been doing. So I put the links to the reports in the chat because someone had asked for them. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in our report. I'm going to highlight a couple sort of aspects of it. But I encourage you to go into the report and read it afterwards. And I think our colleagues on the call will talk about some aspects that they're familiar with in much more detail. So I'm just going to sort of highlight a few aspects. So, this report is based on interviews we did with experts and practitioners across the globe in North America and Europe and Australia, interviews with them. And we talked to people who are helping to plan for and manage and navigate the world of micromobility across different types of systems. And so we spoke to people, we tried to think and talk to people who operate and work with micromobility in different contexts. So if we think about sort of the types of regulations that you might have or sort of regulatory schemes you might have, there are programs that are free floating programs where, users can park anywhere within the zone. We also spoke to people who work on areas in places where there's mandatory parking zones, where, within the zone, there are certain areas that are geofenced where you can park and you can't park elsewhere. And then, of course, there's hybrid schemes, which has a little bit of both. There might be areas in the downtown which are mandatory parking zones, but perhaps in residential areas, it's more free floating. And then finally, we talked to people in cities where they operate scooters and bike share systems where you have to lock it to something. So it could be dockless, but it has to be locked to some sort of device. So I want to highlight 4 key insights that we heard from people, or sort of 4 key topics. And the first is that planners and regulators and other decision makers, really need to plan for parking that is located in areas of high trip demand at street grade and at intersections. And I'll talk more about each of these going on. Secondly, to strategically employ bollards, angled striping, curb stops to effectively demarcate space, right? To say this is where micromobility parking should go. Thirdly, to think about sort of the maintenance needs, whether that's snow or leaf or water runoff, and to use modular designs to reduce costs. And then fourth, to find ways to incorporate parking and other infrastructure into other infrastructure projects, and to think about the funding aspects of this. This is what we call the nuts and bolts. So I'll start by talking about planning for parking. And each of these sections of the report highlights several recommendations, and I'm only going to talk a little bit about some of them. Hopefully my colleagues and in the Q&A we could talk about more in detail. Right, so one of our recommendations is to build parking at grade on the near side of the intersections. This has a number of benefits, some of which are, allows for daylighting the intersection to improve visibility and safety for pedestrians, micromobility users. It typically does not compete with conflicting uses like metered parking or loading zones. It doesn't mean there's no conflicts, but there are fewer. And it can use previously unused space and possibly generate new revenue through fees paid by micromobility operators. Secondly, when it comes to the parking design itself, we heard from a number of different operators and regulators and planners about ways to think about this and things to highlight. And one of them was to build spacious corrals in the street with bollards and curb stops. And the corrals should use bollards on the street side, nearest to the traffic to clearly demarcate the corral. So in this diagram that we have in the report, you can see sort of the green dots, the green circles are the bollards on the street side. Sorry, these images are not popping up, but so not having bollards on the sidewalk side, so only having them on the traffic side. We heard from one person who said that, it's these kinds of things, when you multiply them across hundreds and thousands of these spaces across the city, it can really add up to half as many posts and half as many curb stops. So I think we're always, we start a little over-engineered, this person said, and then they sort of work back to figure out what is the minimal requirements you can have to have a safe, well-regulated, well-managed on-street corral. Someone else said, we realized maybe we just need one curb stop. So this is at the bottom edge of that diagram, and that will reduce the cost. And it also wasn't really needed on the intersection side because you don't have vehicles parking on the intersection side. When it comes to maintenance considerations, we heard a lot from different people to think about seasonality, to use modular designs, and to try and keep it simple. Right. So when taking into consideration winter this person said that on-street, meaning on-street corral, just is going to be a nightmare for snow clearance. It's not really feasible for us to have the corrals on street, getting them cleared without destroying the bollards all the time. It's not really going to happen. So we find that sidewalk corrals are much more feasible, right? And so, we're in the previous slide, we talked about on-street corrals. Here we're talking about sidewalk. And recognizing, a theme we heard is sort of recognizing the context and the local context, not just of the intersection, but of the city itself and what's going on there. Another person said, we think for a maintenance perspective, it's probably better to have these individual elements that you can just swap out if they're damaged or destroyed. So thinking about the modular designs rather than sort of a hard infrastructure that may be more difficult to install and replace. And another person said that, thinking about keeping it simple, that this has allowed us to roll it out in a much bigger scale for very, very low cost. It's very minimal. So now turning to the nuts and bolts of this, we heard that, building micromobility parking, people talked about identifying funding streams, streamlining processes, thinking about grants, and recognizing that parking is relatively affordable, right? Micromobility parking. So one example, people told us that these two U.S. cities estimated the material cost for a single corral would cost just over $1,000 in U.S. dollars for 4 racks, 1 rail set, and 5 flexi posts. And we have a couple other examples of different costs in the report. And obviously prices are changing, right? Who knows what the latest cost would be. But just to think about it, relatively speaking, compared to other transportation infrastructure, these kinds of parking can be relatively affordable. So I'm going to wrap it up there just to give you a tease of the report and let my colleagues talk in more detail about their experiences. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to turn it over to Sandra to hear about experiences in Berlin.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, into the round. I'm going to share my screen. Something is happening. You should see something right now. You see my screen?
Not quite. Not yet.
Oh, okay. Because
nope, here it comes. There it
you
is.
see
It
that?
just took a minute. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Great. So I want to give you an introduction what the BVG, the Berlin Transport Company, is doing regarding dedicated micromobility parking. Before I start with that, I want to give you a short introduction what Jelbi is actually doing. We are a mass project, digital and also with the physical hubs. So we have a mass application where you can book up to 12 different mobility options seamlessly, including booking and payment, and all in one application. We have the Jelbi hubs, our parking hubs. I will explain them shortly. We have a mobility budget where we bring companies all the different mobility options as a new sustainable mobility option to their employees. And we build up a huge Berlin-wide partner alliance with all the different stakeholders. A lot of the stakeholders are for sure the mobility providers. You see them here on the left side. So there are a lot of scooters, bike sharing, car sharing, etc. on for sure public transport. We built those in combination with facility partners. These are hospitals, shopping centers, housing companies, etc. so on. And also a lot of facilities like a gas station, etc. So we bring all the different stakeholders together by implementing the new mobility solutions. The app brings you all the different options in one solution. So you don't need to download all the different providers application. You can have that all seamlessly, ticket purchase, car sharing, and also kick scooters in one application. So physically, we combine them also in all two different kinds of hubs that we are implementing in Berlin, and also over the barriers of Berlin already. We have the bigger Jelbi hubs. You see them on the left, where we implement micromobility parking together with car sharing. Up to 8 car sharing spots are available. On the right side, these are the smaller Jelbi points, we call them. They are only dedicated for everything with 2 wheels. We bring that to Berlin. On how we do that since 5 years. I draw down the process chain, how we gonna come to those spaces. So either we implement the Jelbi hubs on a public space, we have a data mobility platform that we can use where we can see live status where the vehicles are parked right now, so we can identify hotspots where mobility parking is urgently needed. We do the location review, we have an on-site visit, we go with all the different stakeholders there, walking all the different spots and really check if this is a possible spot to implement a Jelbi hub. Then we send out the forms to, if it's a public space, to the different districts. Then we go into the planning, and after getting the approval from the district, we build it and then we open it and inform the sharing providers. With private stakeholders, it's much easier. Just for an example, we tried to get an approval from a public district. It took us 3 years to get an approval. To get a hub for micromobility and car sharing parking, in contrast to private space, that is much easier because the space is owned by, for example, the hospital. They want to bring mobility options to their employees. This is a much quicker process. We only need to sign the contract. Berlin-wide, we have now, for today, 316 hubs. They go all over the city. The red marked areas are the areas where we implement an agreement with the Senate of Berlin, no parking zones. We have a high density of Jelbi hubs. Every 200 meters, we implement a parking spot for micromobility. The yellow dense areas are still free floating, where we bring Jelbi hubs to points of interest, to employees, to shopping centers, points of interest, and so on. We have with the city of Berlin with the Senate, we have 3 different options where we are financed. We have a research and development project until end of this year. So this year is actually a very important year for us to really prove that we bring a benefit to the mobility change and mobility behavior to the Berliners and visitors, etc. So we need to prove until end of this year that this is also then for further development. We have a second partnership with or contract with the city of Berlin that brings us into those dense areas where we implement with every 200 meters a mobility parking to really bring order and cleanness on the pathwalks and get rid of the clutter or different things. And the last project that we call YAS, it's Jelbi as a service. We are implementing Jelbi hubs and points in order for private partners where they, for example, the big hospital, the Charité in Berlin, they paid for having mobility options at their door to have mobility options for their employees. So we built 3 different channels of financing, and we will see where we end up before the new finance round is then agreed. What topics are as well need to be taken care of while implementing parking spots for micromobility? First, it's the planning, the monitoring and evaluation, as I said, to really check in which areas does it make sense, where are the operators going, where's a high need of implementing hubs. We need to measure those. We have 2 dashboards where we check the usage of our hubs. And as you build more hubs, you need to also take care of them because some of them are temporarily closed and we need to find new solutions. So also in the long term, it's a topic. All the different stakeholders, we have over 20 different sharing providers on Berlin Street. We need to take care of and organize so that it's a lot of work and operating, controlling. So we have different service providers. Nicholas said already, like winter service we need to take care of in the winter season, facility management, communication, all the different. We need to talk with the districts, with the police. When there are big events, we need to take care of that all the sharing mobility options then are cleared in case of there is a temporary closement. And for sure, we don't stop there. We also think always about new innovative programs. So we 2 years ago, we implemented the first free Jelbi foot patrol. All the 4 providers for kick scooters agreed to my task to implement a foot patrol, which is now regulatory needed. And also what we have done is we set up a notification where on specific hubs where we have a lot of vehicles, they get an automatic notification when a hub is overcrowded with scooters and bicycles. So the operators get a notification and know that they need to take some vehicles out and relocate them to another spot. And that is nearly all of my end. So the foot patrol is sharing wide. It's not, so the Lime colleague is taking care of all the parked vehicles there because we don't want to see those kinds of impressions that you see on the pictures left. When they go there, they clean up the whole parking spot, bring all the vehicles within the marking zones, take a picture. So we need to have a look on that and clean it up and report it. So that is more or less what we do in Berlin with our more than 300 yeah, Jelbi helps for the aim to have a more livable Berlin. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sandra. And Nathan, we'll have you round out our presentations. And as just a reminder for everyone, feel free to put questions, any questions you have at any point during the webinar into the Q&A, and we'll ask those in a moderated question and answer session after the presentations. And Nathan, take it away.
Well, thank you so much. Hopefully my screen is coming through. Really appreciate the opportunity. Want to shout out Anne Brown and Urbanism Next for having us, and really jealous of Sandra and everything that's going on in Berlin. Really amazing stuff. My name is Nathan Pope. I'm a senior city planner with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure at the City and County of Denver, and I help manage our shared bike and scooter program. I don't like the word micromobility, so I'll say shared bike and scooter throughout the presentation. Give you a quick overview of our program in Denver, talk about infrastructure and technology and kind of where our lessons learned are and what's coming next for us. Denver had an original B-cycle system back in 2010, one of the original dock systems in the US. It was successful for almost a decade, but needed a big public investment right when dockless scooters were falling from the sky. And so the city pivoted to a completely dockless, privately provided model. We did a pilot program and then currently are in our license agreements. Those were a competitive process that selected 2 vendors, Lime and Lyft, who has now transitioned to Bird, where we have about 7,000 e-bikes and e-scooters. One thing that makes our program unique is we have no fees, but we have extensive equity and corral building requirements for our 2 vendors. And that's something that has led to the program being very successful. We had 6.6 million trips here in 2024 and are on for another record-setting year here in 2025. And I don't need to tell this group probably, but we really like this program because it's helping to support our city mobility goals. It's expanding transportation options. It's providing that affordable transportation. I think we have the largest equity program of its kind for shared micromobility anywhere in the US and possibly the world. We know it's replacing car trips. We did a survey and asked folks, if a scooter wasn't available, what would you have taken instead? And 50% of folks said that they were going to either drive themselves or take an Uber or a Lyft. And so we see this as a really important tool in our mode shift and connecting to transit. So I don't need to tell you all that, but I do like to talk about the benefits of the program before we get into some of the challenges around parking. Really want to talk about a couple things we are doing around parking corral design to start things off, and talking about placement, branding, how it's all coming together, how we have a lot of lessons learned here in Denver. I am certainly not a one-man team. We have a wonderful bike parking team that really should be taking all the credit for the great work that's been done here. But just to give you an idea, we started, just your basic U-rack, and then we started experimenting with U-rack corrals. And right about that time, scooters came into the picture and we had to figure out how to manage all of them. In our contracts, we have the operators build the corrals. So we started off nice and simple with paint and post corrals. There's still plenty of those around the city. But where we've been really over the past year plus now is with U-racks and scooter boxes. So kind of taking the best of both worlds, where you have that U-rack where a private device or a shared bike can use it, and then a box for scooters that have the self-standing kickstand. So that's where we are with the design of the corral. I think placement is another key part. We started above curb where we had space. It was a logical place to begin with, but really, as we learn more about people's usage of these devices, it quickly became clear that below curb is the way to go. We really don't want to have folks riding on the sidewalk where we can avoid it. Currently, sidewalk riding is illegal. And so if you put the corral above the curb, people are going to ride on the sidewalk at some point in their journey. So locating them below the curb has been a very successful tool, and not just getting great parking outcomes, but also reducing sidewalk riding. And then really our where we're at currently is we like to site them inside our protected bike lane. So we're building out our protected bike lane network. And at the intersections, we have that daylighting space that Nick mentioned. And that's really been a key perfect location for siting these corrals. There's plenty of other trade-offs that we're looking at when we're looking at placement, curb space trade-offs, if we're having to take a meter space or something like that. Is it adjacent to a bike facility? Is it adjacent to a transit facility? And all these things really impact where exactly at the intersection the corral goes. But really our ideal location is inside the protected bike lane. And then another thing that makes Denver unique is that we don't have those fees that we charge. We don't have vendor fees. Instead, we require them to build the corral network. And so we started off with kind of vendor branded corrals is what I'll call them, where you have a green box for lime and a pink box for lift. That worked great at getting a lot of corrals out in the streets quickly. They had more resources to deploy to build these corrals, and they could do a lot of the site visits and maintenance quickly. But what we learned is we actually left Denver. They're no longer doing dockless devices. And so we ended up with all of these legacy pink boxes and pink infrastructure where Bird came in and they don't have that branding. And it's just confusing to folks. Can I park a lift device in a lime box or a green device in a pink box? So we're definitely moving towards just a city design where there's no vendor branding as part of the corral. It's more agnostic, more open for people who are not using shared devices to use as well. So we're calling those city corrals. The vendor corral was great at getting our system up and running and getting a good network out there, but moving forward, we're definitely looking at more agnostic design. Some ongoing challenges. We are far from perfect here in Denver, and we have a lot of work to continue to do as the program grows. One thing that's really becoming more common now in our highest ridership areas is that corral overflow, where your corral is full, and so people start parking in the bike lane or parking on the sidewalk. And so how can we expand our corrals? And if that's not possible, how can we make sure that the vendors are rebalancing timely enough? Large events is always a challenge as well, and we have good partnership with a lot of our sports events to make sure that they're helping with some of the education. You can see in the bottom photo there, the Nuggets mascot is doing a PSA about how not to park your scooters. Go Nuggets. And keeping cars out has actually been a challenge. Cars are kind of like a gas. They'll fill up the size of their container. If we don't have curb stops in there, you can see that Jeep just ran over our flex posts and is using that lime corral as a parking spot. And I always really try to emphasize maintenance. It's something that we always forget about, at least I always forget about, and it's really important. You can see the dedicated scooter employee there getting the ice off of one of our parking corrals, and it's just a vital part. We have the sun, which does a lot of our snow maintenance, but sometimes you need the manpower as well. And then I put bad actors on there as well, because, you know, even if everything is going perfect, it just takes one person to kind of have a little bit too much time on their hands who can create kind of a mess. This is an older photo, but we still see a lot of folks who are just kind of going down the street, tipping over every device, doing that domino thing. And so that's something that continues to be a challenge, and we struggle sometimes to be able to respond quickly enough. And then that's where we get the photo that makes the news or something like that. So what's next for corrals in Denver? We want to upgrade those legacy corrals, those paint and post corrals, into more robust city infrastructure corrals. We want to have that predictable network where downtown we want to have a corral at every intersection. Every intersection should be predictable. You'll know there'll be a dedicated place to park your device. We're testing out new signage. You can see an example of it here. Bike Plus is kind of our term for everything small with two wheels, and we've got our bear mascot on there riding a bike and a scooter. And then we're also we've done a little bit with placemaking as well. You can see the Lyft team painting a mural with a local artist in one of their corrals to kind of beautify the space. It's not just a painted box. It's not just something you go by. It has a little bit of placemaking benefit as well. We're also really coordinating a lot more. Instead of just swooping in later and adding corrals to an already completed project or at an intersection, how can we integrate these corrals as part of the infrastructure that we build as the Department of Transportation? You can see the upper photo was a grant application we put in for a safety grant that has the corral as part of the daylighting. They're going to put in a corral in those locations. And then this is a photo of a recently completed protected bike lane project where the corral was built into the designs of the project and delivered with the delivery of the bike lane. Real quick, just want to touch on some other aspects of not infrastructure based. You know, education I always say is necessary, but not sufficient, right? We always have to be doing education, but there's always new people coming to the program, whether they're tourists or folks trying it locally for the first time. So I'm always trying to do education. We have a lot of good messaging with partners, with our bids and tourist organizations, and we're even trying to get get messaging on the key cards for local hotels. And then technology is great, and it works some of the time, and it works it doesn't work some of the other times. So always going out in the field, testing things, especially around as we're dipping our toes into the mandatory parking zone world, planning for that GPS drift, understanding what that's going to mean, and really making sure we have the density of corrals. This is kind of one of our first large-scale mandatory parking zones, and we really made sure to have a corral at every intersection. So there was no excuses that folks weren't close enough to a corral to park. And then there's kind of these complementary other technologies that are being rolled out by the vendors. Sometimes they're great and awesome and it's the future, and sometimes they don't work perfectly. So just going out in the field, I dragged some of my colleagues out there to kind of test some of these new technologies in real world situations. Location verification, I think, is great to kind of scan your surroundings and and let the GPS have more accuracy to precisely know where you are when you're parking. And then real-time parking verification is something I'm really excited about. Still not perfect, but instead of just taking a photo of where you've parked, you do a little scan of where you've parked and it says, hey, you've parked correctly, you can end your trip, or hey, you're blocking the sidewalk, move it, move the device to a correct parking location, and then we'll let you end your trip. Really excited about that because it prevents the misparked device from happening in the first place. Last slide from me. I think overall, we just want to make it easy to park correctly. Like the easiest thing to be able to do is what this gentleman's doing, is just ride in the protected bike lane, ride right into the corral and park. That's way easier than bringing it up on the sidewalk and blocking the path. Infrastructure is vital, and that's the first thing you need to be able to make sure that people are parking correctly in our experience, and then the technology can be layered on. Overall, though, just like anything in this industry, there's no silver bullets. It takes a layered approach. There's no one size fits all. No one intersection design can fit every different situation. So being nimble and flexible. So that's it for me. Really appreciate the time and excited to answer questions.
Thanks, Nathan. I'll welcome our full panel back into video. And we're going to kick off a Q&A as well. So there's been a number of questions both in the chat and the Q&A. So I will moderate those and work through both. I want to start off with kind of a big picture question. You all touched on several different dimensions of building out a dedicated network of micromobility, and some you touched on costs, maintenance, spatially locating them, maintaining them, et cetera. So recognizing that cities all have finite budgets, I was curious if you all could talk a little bit about that tension you have of, you only have, say, budget for, we'll just make up a number, 20 corrals, maybe that's great. But how do you see the balance of, say, creating a network like you alluded to, Nathan, and spreading that across a full space versus, say, concentrating them in areas of higher demand? How do you balance competing needs within a network? And then also, what are the ways, or are there certain ways you found to gain additional funding to support continue to build out a network of dedicated parking?
I can take a stab first. Right now, we are focused on getting the corrals where we have the highest density of trip ends, where the most activity is happening. That is where the need is currently. That does create some tension where we share that to city council and they say, hey, we want more of these in our district. We want more of these in our district. And so balancing out kind of the reality of where things are with kind of the more political realities. We do have strong equity requirements for geographic disbursement of devices throughout the city. And so that helps with the corrals as well, because we create demand in other parts of the city that we can then meet with the corrals through those geographic distributions. We currently rely a lot on the vendors to put those corrals in, so they're funding the construction and labor of those. We are looking at more city funding to expand the kind of the city side of things to complement that. We still believe that the vendors are going to be vital partners in building those corrals, but we want to complement it with city dollars as well.
Thinking on thanks, Anne, that was super helpful to think about those tensions. Thinking more about maintenance, there's several questions related to that, and I think probably all three of you could speak to these different dimensions. And so a couple different pieces of maintenance have cropped up already. So one was very tangible. So how do you maintain, say, those beautiful painted murals on the street? Is that something that's just expected to wear and weather over time? who's actually responsible for maintaining corrals in maybe Sandra, your case, or Nathan in Denver. So there's so many actors on the street. There's vendors, there's city, there's public transport operators, and public works, right? There's so many different groups. So what are the different teams responsible for maintenance? And also how and did that transition in Denver when the corrals, I guess you switched from the vendor to the city based corral? Was there a shift at all there as well?
Yeah, so originally it was the vendor who was required to do the maintenance and keep things tidy and organized at their corrals. And that worked fairly well. We do have a fair amount of faded paint and post where you can kind of see the outline of the box, but it's maybe not as vibrant as it used to be. And so we're in the process of making this transition right now. We have not completed that, where there's still a combination. I think we'll still be wanting the vendors to be maintaining the infrastructure, even if it is no longer their brand on it. We still would be expecting them to be important maintenance partners. We do get snow here in Denver, but we also get a lot of sun. So from that perspective, that takes care of a lot of our shoveling maintenance is the sun. But with something we're still working on and still figuring out, it'll be a combination of the vendors and the city.
And for Berlin,
Sandra, anything to add from the?
Yeah, in Berlin, it's actually us, because we are the special permit holders for this area for the corridors. So there is a much of costs to pay external stakeholders to clean them. My facility managers take care of graffitis and stickers on the different signs that we have. But in case for winter service, we have an external service partner who's taking care of ice and snow. When it's a private space, for example, on a gas station close by or the front of the hospital, we have in the private contracts agreements that, for example, also the facility management of those private partnerships are taking care of the daily operations of those spaces. But let's say mostly when they sign a contract with us, they want a full service for their mobility hubs. So it's mostly actually me and my team who's taking care of the cleanness and fully, service, working everything on the hubs.
And I'll just add real quick, Anne. I mean, I think one thing we heard, these are great examples from Berlin and Denver. I mean, we heard different things from different cities, depending on who's responsible for the maintenance and what kind of weather they might have, right? So it might be very different in places like Montreal or in Oslo than in Miami, right? Or Madrid. And so there are different considerations, and depending on whether the vendor is doing it or the city is responsible for snow and other weather events. And then also just remembering to keep, the infrastructure itself, as simple and modular as possible, so that if something does get impacted, it's easy to replace and easy to deal with.
Okay, thanks to you all. There's a question about thinking about making corrals both more visible or not visible, or more apparent to a wide variety of different travelers. And so thinking also about, say, tactile borders instead of just paint around corrals and sidewalks, for example, for people with vision impairments. And then also, I think a related question might be what type of, if you were to add a border or add some kind of tactile pavers, what type of pavers have you either seen implemented, seen considered, did or did not implement, especially thinking about how different tactile pavers are used in different circumstances, like stops, guidance, et cetera. And so is there a way to add, say, tactile markings to the edge of corrals to signal that they're there without, say, signaling something you might not want to, like go this way to cross across the street. So curious if you all have experience with thinking about tactile pavers or in general approaching integrating corrals into the right of way for people with a wide range of disabilities or mobility needs.
we have piloted this when we implement Jelbi hubs on pathwalks, which we try to avoid totally, but in case we cannot find public space on the street. We piloted last year together with the Senate of Berlin and also with some stakeholders, with people of impairments. We did all an on-site visit. We piloted 3 different things that we implement instead of the paint that we usually bring on. We have always the white paint and also yellow for our company. So there are 3 different ways, from cheap to way more expensive, to bring proper white stones with those tactile elements on the pathwalks that we could implement instead of bringing white paint on, so that people with visual impairment can feel that with their tools. So this is actually for us now a must-have in case we implement collards on a pathwalk, which, as I said in the beginning, we try to avoid because we want to bring the pathwalks free from micromobility and change the mobility behavior and take out the car parks. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just agree. Our best strategy here is to just not have them above the curb on the sidewalk. We want as much as possible to keep the corrals on street level, and I think we've been moving a lot more in that direction. Haven't experimented with different tactile treatments here in Denver, but really just to keep the scooters and the parking all below the curb so there's not any sidewalk concerns is the direction we've been going. There is kind of a balance that we've been finding between having the regulatory kind of signage and markings versus more aesthetics and wayfinding and placemaking pieces. And so kind of trying to find a complement between those 2 things has been a point of conversation that we're still learning from.
And related to that then, Nathan, you mentioned this idea of tensions in designs, the regulatory, the placemaking. There's a question from one of the audience about thinking about, from the Jelbi perspective, for example, as well, there's the mobility side of the house, right? But are there ways that Jelbi also considers enhancing the public space? So either visual integration, other types of either wayfinding or placemaking strategies that are also integrated in Jelbi. So Nathan, you mentioned some, but and maybe Nick, you can chime in if you want to raise any other places that you've encountered.
Yeah, I think the one specific question I saw is how are your murals holding up, and not well. The painted murals in the corrals have aged quite a bit, and we haven't touched them up. It's kind of a good indicator of how busy a corral is by how worn out that particular one is. So I think it was a success in understanding that these can be more than just boxes on the street. They can be art places or more integrated into our city. I think that's something that we saw when we started with the vendor corrals, is that community members were pushing back against them a lot more when they were specific for a company. And so now that they're more city branded corrals, people are like, okay, this is city infrastructure. Maybe this is even a benefit for me. And so that's another reason why we've transitioned. I think we want to integrate these so that they're just like a car parking spot where no one's blinking an eye if a new one's coming in, and making them feel just a part of our city. And then the next step is how can we make them actual places where they're more, I don't know, mobility hubs like Sandra's working on.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly. I mean, I like that, what Nathan's saying about thinking about them as more than just a place to park a scooter or a bike. But I think one thing we heard from people, which is in the report, is, to think about using vertical signage and other signals, right, beyond just that it's a corral, to sort of make it clear and obvious to people that this is where you should park a scooter or a bike, and making that really obvious to people. We've done Anne and Calvin and I have done a little research on, how that affects parking. And I think, the jury's still out on that, whether it has an effect, but it's really clear in terms of a visual element about like where scooters should go. And I think it sends a clear signal, like all the other things that we've been talking about.
And I can add that we piloted as well on the bigger Jelbi hubs, where we have also car sharing, where we have charging infrastructure. We provide public Wi-Fi to all the people when they need that. We have Jelbi points with a smart bench that is solar driven, completely no electricity needed to the underground, with the roof with solar panels, so the people can rest, charge their phone, for example. And we also think about other systems like bringing package storage, DHL packages, where people can also afterward pick up maybe their delivery box while dropping off a car sharing car and then walk the last few meters back to their home address. Also bringing a bike repair station. That was also a topic that we thought about might be maybe interesting on a mobility hub. We haven't implemented that, but it's still on the agenda. And also charging infrastructure racks for micromobility and DHL services. We have talked with Swabi, for example. It's the rack where you can put the swappable batteries in, and also an interesting add-on service for users and other operators there close by.
Super interesting examples all around. One question, another question from the audience is thinking about how these systems fit into the broader system of basically small devices. And so there's the shared scooters and bikes, there's also personal ones. How have you all either approached or seen examples of parking for personal devices alongside shared? Is that something you intentionally integrate into, say, dedicated spaces? Are personal and shared encouraged to park at similar spaces? Are you thinking about co-locating? Are they totally separate? How have you navigated that there's shared and personal devices operating in cities?
I think it's such a exciting problem to have, and that we're excited to have anybody who has a small device park at one of these corrals. If they need it, it's there for them, whether that's shared or personal. I wasn't able to grab a photo, but we had a big cargo bike kind of parked in one of our scooter boxes one time. Perfect. That's exactly what it's there for. We want anybody, either shared or personal, to be able to use these corrals. And our goal is to build the network that's dense enough to support both.
I can share from Berlin Insight. So we started as we have the regulation, and the place and the location is actually a little bit ours, as we have a special permit or a contract. Originally, the idea was to have it only for shared mobility options, because we have really so many in Berlin. Over 40,000 of only kick scooters, not bikes included. So they're on top, and also on top the car sharing solution. So we wanted to bring order and cleanness first for the shared mobility options. Then actually last year we thought together where we have areas where we see a need of implementing mobility hubs, and we cannot find or get an approval special permit for a corral, that we look on private bicycle parking, those corrals that we have where we see at least 4 or 5 racks, where we do not start proactively a fight with private bike sharing owners. So we thought about piloting this together with one kick scooter operator as like a digital hub, where we do not bring color on the ground, where we do not bring a signage, etc. there, but we bring an alternative where we see where micromobility is open to park there, because there's actually close vehicles like bicycles also invited to park there. So this is still an idea to maybe close our networks of collards with those options with digital hubs, where we do not have to build proper infrastructure.
I'll just quickly add, again, I think these are all great points. And I think one of the things that we talked about in the report is, thinking about including bike racks as a way for just signal that, lots of other bikes and scooters can go here too. Other people can, use these spaces. And I think it's really important for cities to think about, making these spaces as useful for everyone, not just for certain companies and certain operators.
And the bike racks, while they work great for personal devices, they also keep cars out. And we've been having a lot. You can tell that's top of mind for me right now. Is cars are just kind of squeezing their way in any way they can, and if there's a bike rack there, it really limits that.
Yeah, that photo you shared, Nathan, of the truck just driving over the bollards really hit that point home, I think. Okay, so rounding out our questions, and maybe we'll have a chance for one more, but I think this would be a good one to end on as well, which is ideally it'd be great to snap our fingers. We have budget. We could just say, we want corrals to go in here, 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 the end. That would probably be too simple. So can you talk, all three of you talk a little bit about the challenges thinking about the basic from idea to actually implementation? So you all talked some about especially the siting, the maintenance considerations, but more on the maybe the governance side or coordination with other actors within the city. So can you talk about either vendors under design and compliance or internal departments, so traffic, different city laws, etc., power, whatever it might be, some of the challenges to maybe implementing where you might have wanted to implement a corral and it didn't go as you planned for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I think the first one I was inspired by, I can't remember off the top of my head if it was Charlotte, I think, where they have corrals in front of fire hydrants. That was a great inspiration to me, and that's something that's on my to-do list, is to sit down with our fire department to say, hey, we have this great curb space. We always have cars parking here illegally anyways. What if we put a corral here that could make it easier for folks to park their scooters, and then when the need for the fire hydrant is needed, it's really easy to continue to access. So that was an inspiration from other folks working in this group. We definitely have tried to find a balance as we put more corrals in, of the right level of notification to adjacent property owners in the community, to make sure that they are aware, but not making a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be. And so we've had a couple times where we've worked with a property owner to find a different siting location because they had concerns. All of this is we are able to find win-wins, but it takes time and resources. So not just the resources to buy the parts and do the manual labor, but the time to talk to businesses, talk to elected officials, and make sure they're comfortable about these things all takes additional staff time that we don't budget for necessarily. So as we continue to get hundreds of more corrals, it's something that we need to think about to make sure that the program can continue to grow in a sustainable fashion.
I have one or two examples. When the football European Championships was in Europe last year, we wanted to build a lot of collards close where the people are, where they're partying and watching those games, especially in those areas in Tiergarten. We have a lot of embassies. And when we went there and did the on-site visit with police and the district and the people of the Senate and all the providers, it was not possible. So because of security reasons, these are locations in Berlin where it's not allowed to build in something in front of an embassy. And also when in case you have an old historic monument and house, it is also not allowed to bring it in front. So we have it regarding monument protection. We needed to change the whole painting. Everything on the Jelbi hubs is in yellow, as this is the corporate color from BVG. You see it on my bus, it's inverted. So regarding monument protection, we needed to design everything in inverted design to get aligned together with the monument protection. So normally it's all yellow with black colors on it. And for that reason, we needed to change. So yeah, these are the situations, yeah, when you have to get over new barriers.
Very much understood. It's not an easy task, but we are going to wrap there and very, very much appreciate. I think it's not an easy task, but you all have a lot of experience and insight that can pave the way or pointed a clear direction into both the barriers, but also the opportunities that exist in different cities and the strategies you've employed very successfully. Very big thank you to Nathan, Sandra, and Nick for joining us, and to our entire audience for joining us today to talk about dedicated parking for shared bikes and scooters. We appreciate your time. This recording will be posted after the event. And thank you all again for attending. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye from Berlin.
Thanks all. Bye.